I need to read the skill files before writing. But since this is pure creative writing, no file creation needed. Let me check the names list I already have in context and write directly. Names to avoid: Walter, Daniel, Christopher, Eleanor, Harold, Nathaniel, Brittany, Lily, Raymond, Marcus, Bernard, Patricia, Rudy, Gregory, Addie, Gloria, Frank, Connie, Todd, Serena, Arthur, Kevin, Diane, Sophie, Andrew, Melissa, Joanna, Earl, Tina, Scott, Vic, Lawrence, Mitchell, Preston, Barbara, Owen, Caleb, Rose, Vanessa. The night my son almost signed his life away, I was sitting across from a woman I didn't trust and couldn't explain why. That's the part that still gets me. I had no proof, nothing concrete, just this low, grinding unease in my chest that I kept trying to talk myself out of. She was charming. She said the right things. She laughed at the right moments. And my son, my 34-year-old son who rebuilt his life from nothing after the divorce, he looked at her like she'd invented sunlight. I should have been happy for him. I wasn't. Her name was Nadine. She'd come into his life about 8 months before that dinner. He'd met her at a fundraiser for the local children's hospital, which, looking back, was either the most perfect cover story anyone could engineer or just the cruelest kind of coincidence. She worked in estate planning, she said. She had her own condo in Raleigh, drove a sensible car, talked about her elderly mother in Asheville like someone who actually cared. My son's name is Jeremy. And Jeremy, God love him, has always been the kind of man who leads with his heart. His mother was the same way. She passed 6 years ago, breast cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end, and losing her cracked something open in him that never fully healed. The divorce from his first wife 2 years later didn't help. By the time Nadine walked into his life, he was lonely in that quiet, dignified way that good men get lonely. The kind where they don't complain. They just wait. So when he called me last March to say he'd met someone, I was glad. When he called again in June to say things were getting serious, I was cautiously glad. And when he showed up at my house in August with her sitting in the passenger seat of his truck, I shook her hand and smiled and told myself the unease I felt was just a father being protective. That's what I told myself. The dinner was Nadine's idea. She wanted to celebrate the engagement. They'd gotten engaged quietly, just the two of them, 2 weeks before, with a family dinner at a restaurant she'd chosen in downtown Durham. Nice place, white tablecloths, the kind of menu where nothing has a price next to it, because if you have to ask, you're at the wrong table. My daughter-in-law, Jeremy's sister Claire, couldn't make it. She was in Phoenix for a work conference, so it was just me, Jeremy, Nadine, and Nadine's friend she'd brought along, a woman named Paula, who talked exclusively about real estate prices and barely touched her food. I remember thinking, this is a strange guest to bring to a family engagement dinner. But I smiled. I ordered the salmon. I listened to Nadine talk about the wedding venue she'd already started researching, a converted barn outside Chapel Hill, $12,000 minimum, and I watched my son's face and told myself the hollow feeling in my stomach was nothing. Then Jeremy's phone rang. He looked at it, made an apologetic face at Nadine, and said it was his business partner. Something about a contract deadline. He stepped away from the table, phone pressed to his ear, disappearing toward the lobby. Paula excused herself a moment later. Powder room. And Nadine? Nadine's eyes followed Jeremy across the restaurant, and then she picked up her own phone and started typing. Not casually, quickly, like she was sending something that mattered. I don't know what made me look up right then. I don't know why my eyes went to the older gentleman 2 tables over instead of staying on my wine glass. He was maybe 75, white hair, navy jacket, hands that looked like they'd done real work once. He'd been sitting alone since before we arrived. I noticed him earlier only because he seemed out of place, eating alone somewhere this formal. He was looking directly at me, not the casual glance of someone whose gaze had wandered. He was looking at me, deliberately. And when he saw that he had my attention, he didn't look away. He held up one finger, wait, and then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. He set it on the edge of his table. Then he tilted his head, just slightly, toward Nadine, and then back to the paper. I sat very still. Nadine was still typing on her phone, angled away from me. I stood up slowly, the way you do when you don't want to attract attention, and I walked toward the restrooms, past the old man's table. And as I passed, his hand moved the paper half an inch toward the edge. I took it without stopping. I didn't open it until I was standing in the hallway near the coat check, far enough from the dining room that no one could see my face. The handwriting was small and careful, old-fashioned cursive, the kind they don't teach anymore. Her real name is Nadine Graves. Google her and Gerald Okafor, Greensboro 2019. Ask your son if he's changed his beneficiary yet. Get him out of there tonight. I'm sorry to frighten you. That was it. I read it 3 times. My hands were not steady. Gerald Okafor, Greensboro 2019. I typed it into my phone right there in the hallway, shoulders turned to the wall. The first result was an obituary. Gerald Okafor, 58, of Greensboro, North Carolina, had passed away in October 2019 after a brief illness. He was survived by 2 adult children and a sister in Atlanta. He had been the owner of a regional logistics company. The obituary was warm and detailed and mentioned his generosity and his love of woodworking. The second result was a legal notice. A probate filing from Guilford County. The estate had been contested by his children on the grounds that a significant portion of assets, the filing said substantial real property and financial accounts, had been transferred to a third party in the months preceding Gerald Okafor's death. The third party's name was redacted in the version I could access, but I didn't need to see the name. My chest felt like someone had pressed a cold hand flat against my sternum. I walked back to the table. Jeremy was back from his call, laughing at something Nadine had said. Paula was back too, stirring her drink. The candle in the center of the table flickered. I sat down. I smiled. I said, "Jeremy, I'm sorry, I think the salmon is disagreeing with me. Would you mind walking me to the car? I need some air." He looked at me with immediate concern. I've had some heart trouble in the past, and he knows it. He was already standing before I'd finished the sentence. Nadine's expression didn't change. That was the thing I noticed. Most people, when a dinner companion says they feel unwell, their face does something. A flicker of concern, a shift. Hers stayed exactly the same. Pleasant, composed, watching. "Of course," she said. "Take all the time you need." In the parking lot, I handed Jeremy my phone. I'd pulled up the obituary and the probate notice side by side. "I need you to read these," I said. "Both of them." He looked at me like I was confused. "Dad, what is this?" "Just read them." He read. I watched his face. I watched it the way I watched his face when he was 7 years old, and I had to tell him that his dog had died. That particular quality of comprehension arriving in slow, awful stages. "This could be a coincidence," he said. His voice was careful. "It could be. She has a common name. She does." He looked at the obituary again. He was quiet for a long moment. A car pulled out of the lot behind us, headlights sweeping across the asphalt. "Who gave you this?" he asked. "A man inside. I've never seen him before in my life." Jeremy ran his hand over his face. "Dad, have you changed your beneficiary?" The silence that followed was the answer. "She asked me about it last week," he said quietly. "Just, said we should think about updating our paperwork before the wedding. She said her financial advisor had suggested it. I thought..." He stopped. "I thought she was being practical." I put my hand on his arm. "Son, I need you to trust me right now. Not forever, just right now." He looked at the restaurant entrance, then back at me, then at his phone, which he was still holding. "Okay," he said. We called Claire from the parking lot. It was close to 10 at night, which made it 7 in Phoenix, and she picked up on the second ring. I told her to pull up everything she could find on Nadine Graves and Gerald Okafor. I told her we'd call her back in an hour. Jeremy went back inside alone. He told Nadine I was genuinely not feeling well and that he was going to drive me home. He was calm. He was kind. He said nothing that would suggest anything was wrong. I watched him from the car. Through the window, I could see Nadine's face when he told her. She smiled. She touched his hand. She said something that made him nod. He walked out 5 minutes later and got in the driver's seat, and we left. Neither of us spoke for the first 10 minutes. Then Jeremy said, "She texted me before I even got to the car." "What did she say?" "She said she hoped I'd look after you. Said she was looking forward to seeing us both this weekend." He said it the way you say something when you're trying to understand what you're looking at. Claire called back at 11:15. She'd been on her laptop for an hour. She's an analyst by profession, and when Claire decides to find something, she finds it. Nadine Graves had been engaged to Gerald O'Corfer. They'd been together for approximately 11 months before his death. The probate case had been settled out of court. The terms were confidential, but a local Greensboro news article from early 2020 referenced it obliquely, describing a dispute over pre-death asset transfers in connection with a Guilford County estate. Claire had also found a marriage record, not from North Carolina, from Tennessee 2016. Nadine Graves had been married to a man named Philip Thorne in Knoxville. Philip Thorne had died in 2017. He was 51. He had owned a small chain of HVAC service companies in East Tennessee. Claire's voice was steady when she told us, but I could hear what was underneath it. "There might be more," she said. "I only had an hour." "Dad, Jeremy needs to talk to an attorney in the morning." Jeremy sat on my couch that night. We didn't say a lot. At some point, I made coffee, and we drank it at the kitchen table the way we used to when he was in high school and had a problem he didn't know how to solve, and I was the person he'd come to with it. "I was going to marry her," he said at one point. Not accusatory, just processing it out loud. "I know. I thought she was." He stopped again. He's not a man who cries easily, but his eyes were red. "I really thought she was the one, Dad. There's nothing to say to that. There really isn't." So I just sat with him. In the morning, he called his attorney, a woman named, well, I'll just say she was thorough and fast and exactly what he needed. Within 2 days, she'd confirmed that Nadine had indeed been named as Jeremy's beneficiary. He quietly updated the paperwork in September, 3 months into the relationship, thinking he was being responsible about estate planning. Nadine had walked him through the forms. She'd framed it as being practical. The attorney also reached out through her network to a colleague in Greensboro who had been peripherally involved in the Okafor estate dispute. The colleague confirmed, off the record, that the woman at the center of that dispute had matched a very specific description, and that the dispute had involved a beneficiary change made 11 weeks before Gerald Okafor's death. Gerald Okafor had died of heart failure. He'd had no prior cardiac history. He was 58 years old. I thought about Philip Thorne in Knoxville. 51. HVAC business. Dead a year after marrying her. Jeremy changed his beneficiary back within the week. He also, on his attorney's advice, filed a report with the Raleigh Police Department and provided copies of everything Claire had found to a detective who took it seriously enough to open a file. I don't know exactly what happened after that. Some of it is still ongoing, and his attorney has asked him not to discuss it publicly. What I can tell you is that Nadine stopped reaching out to Jeremy about 3 weeks after that dinner. Her phone number went dead. The condo in Raleigh, when Claire drove past it, had a for rent sign in the window. She was gone. I think about the man in the navy jacket sometimes. I went back to that restaurant the following week, alone, on a Wednesday evening, and asked the hostess if she recognized him from a description. She didn't. I asked if they had a reservation under any name that matched. She couldn't share that. I sat at a table near where he'd been sitting, and I ordered coffee, and I thought about how he knew. What had connected him to Gerald Okafor, or to Philip Thorne, or to Nadine, whether he'd lost someone, whether someone had warned him too late. I left a $20 tip and drove home without an answer. What I do know, what I have to hold on to, is that in the moment it mattered. When my son was 3 weeks away from signing a document that could have redirected everything he owned. when he was looking at a woman over a candlelit table and believing she was his future. Something made me look up. Something made that man hold my gaze instead of looking away. Something made me take the paper. I don't say this lightly. I'm not a man given to dramatic declarations about faith. But I'm 63 years old. I buried my wife. I've made mistakes I can't undo. And I have learned the hard way and the slow way and the grieving way that there are moments in life when you can either listen to the thing you can't explain or you can talk yourself out of it and live with what comes next. I listened that night. And my son is still here. Jeremy spent Thanksgiving at my house this year. He brought a pecan pie store-bought because he can't bake to save his life, which is something he inherited from me, and we watched football and argued about the Cowboys the way we always do. Claire drove up from Raleigh with her husband and their 2 kids. The little one fell asleep on my shoulder after dinner, right there on the couch, and I just sat still and let her sleep. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Not the anger, though there's some of that. Not even the fear, though there's plenty of that too when I let myself think too carefully about what might have been different. It's that moment on my couch with my granddaughter asleep on my shoulder, the football game going quiet in the background, my son in the kitchen laughing about something with his sister. That's what I almost didn't get. That's what I'm grateful for every single day. If you've got a feeling you can't explain about someone in your family's life, if something is telling you to look closer, ask harder, pay attention, please. Listen to it. Ask the uncomfortable questions. Be the person who looks like they're overreacting right up until the moment they're not, because the man in the navy jacket wasn't always going to be there. Next time he might not be. You might have to be him for someone else. I've been thinking a lot lately about the word target. It's a cold word, clinical. The kind of word that belongs in a police report or a courtroom, not at a candlelit dinner table where your son is smiling at the woman he thinks he's going to marry. But that's what Jeremy was. A target. And Nadine, whoever she really was, wherever she is now, she was good at it. She was patient. She spoke softly. She picked a man who was lonely and decent and still carrying grief, and she walked into that grief like she owned it. Here's what I keep coming back to. She almost got away with it. Not because Jeremy is naive. He's not. He's a smart, careful man who rebuilt his life from real loss with real effort. She almost got away with it because she understood something that most people don't want to admit, that the people most worth targeting are often the ones with the most integrity. They trust slower, but once they trust completely. They don't look for angles because they don't operate that way themselves. Jeremy had no framework for what Nadine was, because he had never been what Nadine was. That's not weakness. I want to be clear about that. What happened to my son was not a failure of his character. It was a calculated exploitation of it. And there is a difference, a significant, important difference, between being deceived by someone who spent months engineering your trust and simply being foolish. What I've learned, at 63, after burying a wife and raising 2 kids and making more mistakes than I can count, is that wisdom isn't about being suspicious of everyone. It's about paying attention without apology. It's about letting yourself feel the thing you can't explain and not immediately talking yourself out of it because you want to be polite or reasonable or the kind of father who doesn't make scenes at engagement dinners. I almost talked myself out of it that night. I almost left the note on the floor. I almost decided that the unease I'd been carrying for 8 months was just a father struggling to let go. The cost of that choice, had I made it, would have been everything Jeremy worked for, his home, his savings, possibly his life, if the pattern I was looking at meant what I thought it meant. What stopped me wasn't cleverness. It was just the decision, made in a hallway near a coat check, to take the discomfort seriously, to act on what I knew in my body, even when I couldn't defend it in words. That's the thing I'd want anyone to take from this. Not that the world is full of people like Nadine. It isn't. Most people are trying their best, same as you. But that your instincts exist for a reason. They are the accumulated result of everything you've lived and learned and survived. When they fire, they deserve your attention. Not blind obedience, attention. Investigation. The willingness to ask the uncomfortable question, even when asking it might cost you a comfortable evening. Jeremy is fine. That's the sentence I get to say, and I don't take it lightly for a single day. He's rebuilding again, which is something I've watched him do before, and he does it with a kind of quiet dignity that makes me prouder of him than I know how to say. Claire drove up last month just to have dinner. No occasion, just because. We sat on the back porch after the kids went to bed, and she said, "I keep thinking about how close it was." I said, "Me too." She said, "What do you think would have happened?" I didn't answer. I think she knew I didn't need to. What I know is this. The man in the navy jacket made a choice to get involved when it wasn't his problem and it wasn't his family, and he had every reason to look away. I don't know what it cost him. I don't know what he carried that made him recognize what he was seeing, but he paid attention. He acted, and because he did, I got to sit on a porch with my daughter talking about nothing in particular on an ordinary Tuesday night. That's the whole thing. That's the entire point. The small choices to act with courage when it's inconvenient. They compound. They ripple outward in ways you will never fully see. Be the man in the navy jacket when you get the chance. You might not know for years, or ever, what it meant to someone else. But it will have meant everything